We started last time in explaining a verse of Scripture that is kind of unique. In verse number 15 of Proverbs 30, it says, "The horseleach has two daughters, crying, 'Give, give.' There are three things that are never satisfied, yea, four things say not it's enough. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not filled with water, and the fire that saith not, it is enough." Now, the first thing we did in order to help us to understand this unusual verse of Scripture, of all things you come to church to study about a horseleach. But it is in the Bible, and everything in the Bible is important. It's there for a reason, either a direct statement or to use as an illustration. And basically, that's what this is. It is a type. And God often uses various things as visual aids in order to help us to understand something we cannot see. Now, for example, in Matthew 13, we have the type and the antitype given there in the immediate context, and that is the wheat and the tares. Now, Jesus then shows us that the wheat has to do with believers who will be gathered and put into his barn. The barn synonymous of his earthly kingdom and people who believe the kingdom message. The tares are those who are children of the devil. They're in the world and part of the world system. They are gathered first and they are burned. Now, with a type such as this, it's pretty easy because right in the context, you have the meaning of the type. Now, what is a little more difficult is that sometimes types are spoken of in the Bible, but the antitype is discovered in nature. We saw that Paul said a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Now, he doesn't go on to explain that simply because these people made their own bread. They knew the difference between leavened and unleavened bread. They knew what leaven could do. It would puff up the bread. And of course, that's what leaven does. It can corrupt the whole loaf, and it can, as pride, and that's the implication here, corruption and pride, puff up the entire church because they went against Paul and his message, and they were following the group called the Judaizers, going back under law, thinking that they were better than those who simply believed in Christ and kept it at that. But another type of teaching that is even more difficult is to have something revealed as we do here in nature, and then go to the Bible and find out what it does illustrate. And we went to Leviticus where it talks about clean and unclean fish. You had to have both fins and scales. Now, the fins are those particular parts of a fish which guide, and they are always in the form of a triangle, and the triangle is the geometric symbol of God. So you're talking about God being attached to the fish, associated with the fish, and guiding the fish. Scales are that part of the fish coming from the Hebrew word righteousness. So the fish is guided by God and is covered with his righteousness. Those were the fish that they could eat. Now we have a fish that has a big fin on its back that is in the form of a triangle, but it has no scales. And that is, of course, the shark. Will make this guy the great white. And he comes up over the waters when he's going to eat his prey. And that is like Antichrist, who rises above the nations of the world. That is the type of the waters. But he hides himself in the world from something that is quite obvious. If the world would see him, they would see him without scales, without righteousness. You see, he pretends to be God, but he doesn't have God's righteousness. And that is a type of an unclean fish. There are other types of fish that have very small fins, but they do have the scales. A lot of times these fish are the scavengers. They pretend that they have righteousness, but they feed off the bottom. They feed off other unclean food. And all of our righteousness is as filthy rags. And it is a type of self-righteousness. So you have to go to nature, and God mentions these things, but then you have to come back to the Bible to find out the type. Now that's what we've done with the horseleach. A horseleach is nothing more than a 6 to 8 inch long worm. And this particular type of worm has many unusual features. Some of the leeches have a proboscis where they can penetrate their prey and suck their blood. But this one only has a mouth. And the interesting thing about this mouth is that it has some teeth where it can actually make an incision in the flesh. And that incision, of course, begins the blood to flow, and it then secretes two things. One is an anti-clotting measure, where it can get as much blood as it wants because the body cannot seal that off from the leech. Secondly, it's a glue-type substance that seals the connection between the mouth and the flesh of the horse or man or whatever other animal, so that it's hard to disattach from the flesh. Now, all of this, as we're talking about the flesh, will give you just a little inkling about what we're talking about, the old sin nature. The old sin nature actually was not part of the human flesh, but attached itself at the fall of man through Adam. And one of the things about this horseleach is it is a perfect type of the old sin nature. Now, you'll note, verse number 15, the horseleach hath 2 daughters crying, give, give. The old sin nature has 2 trends and a blend. It has a central chamber that takes it all in and brings it back up into the emotions. But on either side of the stomach of the horseleach, there are 2 containers. There is no digestion that goes along here. They're just storage compartments in the leech. The central figure here is basically the size of the leech when it is empty. But its 2 daughters give a cry. Give, give. And there are 2 trends to the old sin nature which cry constantly. They're never satisfied. It's never enough. And their cry is give, give. One is the moral side where there is self-righteousness. The other is the immoral side where there is unrighteousness. But anytime a person is not spiritual, any decision he makes actually is twofold. It is both moral and immoral at one at the same time. That is the blend of the old sin nature. He might do something moral by, say, not stealing against his fellow man, but if he rejects Christ as Savior, he's stealing against God. He's stealing against something that rightfully belongs to God, and he takes it for himself. Well, that's an immoral action. And the fact that he wants life good apart from God, so that he doesn't steal and yet refuses Christ, means that he's moral and immoral at one of the same time. So these 2 pouches, these 2 containers on the side indicate the 2 trends of the old sin nature. Now, once these things are full, the worm actually looks somewhat round because it can pump in, siphon in enough blood into itself to increase its volume 5 times its size and weight. Now that is something. Now, another thing about this thing is that aside from the muscles that help it to siphon and move, aside from its mouth, all it is a living stomach. It's something that has an insatiable desire to live off the flesh of another. And that is a type of the old sin nature. It has no brains, no ears, no eyes, no arms, no legs, no hands, no feet. All it wants to do is to eat. Now, any comparison to those of us in the church that like to eat insatiably with insatiable, really, we're not horse leeches. We do stop every once in a while. But this guy, he cries, give, give, constantly. So that is the horseleach. One other thing with regard to the circle, he is hermaphroditic. In other words, he is male and female at one at the same time, and he mates with himself to reproduce his image. And he must form a circle then to mate. And all of this, as we put it together, is an indication of the old sin nature that we'll bring before you here in just a little bit, as we did the last time. As you can see, the old sin nature has a mouth that attaches itself to to our emotions, and it wants to siphon our life. It lives off our flesh. It is resident in our flesh, and it has a blend, its stomach, and it wants to get all it can from us. It wants to feel our life. It wants to use us to have the flesh exalted and honored and so forth. Then it has the two trends, and these two trends are constantly wanting to be satisfied. And it is in our flesh, and it is definitely something that is difficult to get out of the flesh. And in fact, it can only be neutralized this side of glory after we get a resurrection body. That's the only way we can get the horseleach off our back. Now, that is not a very pretty thought, but it's true. All right, let's go back to our verse and look at a couple of things here before we take another peek at the old sin nature. There are three figures of speech used in these two verses. One of them is called apoliptoton. You say, Pastor, why would this help us to understand the old sin nature? Well, it is attributed to the two daughters, the two accompanying containers of the horseleach. The horseleach has two daughters crying, "Give, give." Now, what is a polyptoton? A polyptoton is something in the language, in the written page, that will allow us to see the intensity, the strength, the volume, the demand, the threat, as it were, of these two daughters. You talk about two wicked ladies. The language itself is going to tell us how they are. So a polyptoton says that there are many inflections. Now, each time they yell, Yahab is the Hebrew, and it means give. But because it's in the Cal imperative, polyptoton, the first one yells out, the stomach is full, and now they want the side containers full, this leech does. She wants her other containers filled up because her stomach's full, and she wants to literally suck as much blood out of this being as possible. So what does her first daughter or first stomach cry out? Imperative mood. You must give or else. Cal imperative. You better give. I'm going to hurt you if you don't give. And it is a threat. But now, just when the person says, look, I've about given all I can, the second daughter on the left-hand side is filled up, and the third daughter decides, well, hey, if you're going to fill the one daughter, I'm going to get my turn. So you know what she has to do? She has to raise the volume. She has to insist on her fair share. So the polyptoton says that she puts several exclamation marks and capitalizes all of them, and she's yelling at full volume, don't forget me, you must give to me or else. So both daughters are reflected here in the insistence, the strength, the threatening of, I better get my fair share. I better get what's due me or else I'm going to hurt you. So that lets us know about the old sin nature. You see, the flesh plays hardball with us. It's going to get its due. It's going to get its pound of flesh, as it were, its pint of blood. And it cries out on both sides of the trend, you have to satisfy me. You've got to satisfy the flesh, whether it's the pride of self-righteousness or the sheer pleasure of unrighteousness. You've got to satisfy me or else I'm going to cause you problems. And that's why the only way to conquer the flesh is salvation, spirit filling, and cycling of doctrine. And that's why I bring this out, because this teaches us that the flesh, or these two daughters, are really crybabies, very demanding. All right, now, secondly, it's an epanorthosis. What is an epanorthosis? It means to draw attention to something by making a correction as you speak. You correct it, you recall it, and then you restate it. Note, he is going to give, Solomon is, the writer of Proverbs, a list of things that go along with the horseleach. A list of things that are going to show her desires, her strategy in order to suck more blood, more material substance from people or from the horse. So he uses an epanorthosis. There are three things. Now we read that and we say, okay, three things. We're ready. We find the list right in our mind. 1, 2, 3. We're ready for him to give us these three things. And all of a sudden, he wants to make a correction so that we will perk up and say, well, now, which is it, 3 or 4? He's trying to capture our attention because he really wants to drive home the point. And that is the second aspect of this particular figure of speech. It adds to the strength of its argument by adding another illustration in the list. There are 3, and then he says, wait 1 second, there are 3 things that are never satisfied, yea, 4 things that say it's not enough. You say 3, okay, but then he combines one more, and that's done all the way through the book of Proverbs. They say there are 6 things, yea, 7 things, there are 3 things, yea, 4 things, and that is done. That is a figure of speech to use the grammar to catch our attention and to strengthen his argument. Okay, I've given you some. Well, let me add one more. Let me just seal the doom of my list here by adding another. So that is what's here. Now, again, you will understand that the number 4, and someday we will study this and show you all of the examples of 4 in the Bible that talk about the earth, talk about nature and creation with regard to the number 4. And the number 4 is significant in that regard because he's using the horseleach, something that is very earthly, let me tell you. There is nothing as common as a horseleach. Now, therefore, he is going to move and give us these 4 things in what's known as the third figure of speech, an antithesis. This is another grammatical technique in order to help us to understand some things. An antithesis, as he gives them here, is the setting of one idea, phrase, or thing in contrast or contradistinction to another so that we might learn by the comparison here. And you will note the unusual list, but actually they are connected. I mean, they can be, though they are different and opposite, yet there is a similarity here. The grave, the barren womb, the arid ground, and the fire. Again, verse 16. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not filled with water, and the fire that says it is not enough. All right, if you would, please turn with me to chapter 1 of this book. All of these things typify something that the old sin nature uses in order to get its way. Now, what does the grave do in order to fill itself up? It has to take the life of another, doesn't it? If the grave stands for something that is an empty chamber or cavity, and again, nature doesn't like a vacuum, it always wants to fill up. And the grave here is being personified by the author to stand for a desire. What does it do then? If it wants the substance of another, What does it have to do to that person? It has to kill that person. That's the old sin nature. Note, Proverbs 1, verse 10. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. If they say, come with us, let us lay wait for blood. Let us lurk privately for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them up as the grave, and whole as those that go down to the pit. We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, walk not thou in their way. Refrain thy foot from their path. For their feet run to evil. Make haste to shed blood. They wait, verse 18, for their own blood. They lurk privately for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain. It takes away the life of the owners thereof. Now, what does that grave stand for? Prime example of greed. Somebody that wants to either kill someone else or hurt someone else in order to take their substance and fill up the void in their life. That's the grave personified. And that's the horseleach, you see. Instead of going out and working for its own substance, and that's what the book of Proverbs is, to learn God's wisdom applied to life so that, as we're here in chapter 3, we can honor the Lord, verse 9, with our substance. Proverbs 3:9. The first fruits of all our inheritance. So shall your barns be filled with plenty, and your presses burst out with new wine. I mean, we learn by wisdom to put God first, and God then will honor us by taking care of our needs. But these guys say, phooey on God, let's get rid of the person that has so we can put his stuff amongst ours. That's why the grave is there. Let's kill him. That's what the grave does. And then it uses the dust, the very substance of the life of that person, to fill itself up. Okay? Now, the grave is personified here. It is an inanimate object, but it's given feelings, desires, lusts, as it were, illustrating the horseleach or the old sin nature. Now we come to an animate object, and that is the womb. Turn with me to chapter 2 of Proverbs. Chapter 2 of Proverbs. Now, throughout the book of Proverbs, it talks about the whorish woman. It talks about a woman who simply wants to use men, first of all, to satisfy her own lusts, and then to be able to control them. I mean, through the use of extortion and that sort of thing. I've had relations, and it is someone in the office, and this person says, you either promote me or I'm going to tell. And probably there have been a lot of job promotions because of that. But that's what it's talking about here. It's talking about somebody with an insatiable lust to either promote oneself pleasurably or with physical things by utilizing the natural desire in an inordinate way. We need wisdom, therefore, verse 16, to deliver us from the strange woman, from the stranger that flatters with words, that forsakes the guide of her youth, forgets the covenant of her God. For her house inclines to death, and her paths unto the dead. None that go into her return again, neither take they hold of the paths of life. In other words, most of the time, once this happens, the womb holds sway in order to get the life it wants of another. It uses the life of another in order to promote itself. But now, go to chapter 6. This is where it especially comes out. Verse number 24. To keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in your heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. Now that's the whole thing. You're going to get taken. You are going to have her hand literally in your wallet. That's what he's saying here. If you are caught in this fashion. Note verse number 26. For by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought down to a piece of bread. You see, it's talking about here with the grave, an inanimate object personified, but it wants to fill itself up with the substance of another. So what does it do? It mistreats that person. It doesn't give that person the proper job promotion. You hate and envy another person. You do all you can to use them to climb the ladder of success in the work world. Or you end up killing another person in order that you might gain what they have. But on the other hand, here we have something that is truly alive with lusts and desires. And the whole purpose here is simply to reduce somebody to a piece of bread, to hold its sway over them so that you can extort money for yourself. That is the insatiable desire of the womb of a woman who has no scruples about her at all, simply hunting for, note the last part of verse number 26, the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Just as the grave takes the form of life in order to disassemble it so that its substance might fill it up, the womb of the whorish woman takes the form of life to get the precious life and the substance which is going to give it that which is secure, meaning for security for itself. Okay, now let's go to Luke chapter 12. We've got two more illustrations here. Luke chapter 12 is going to give us the story of the ground. It is ground that is not filled with water. Now, this time, we have earth that soaks up the life-producing substance, but keep soaking it up. Would you ever want to try to water the Sahara Desert before your morning coffee? You know, you got to go out and water the lawn. You want to go and attach the hose to the Sahara. I mean, you're going to be there a long time. Why? Because all it's going to do is soak it up and soak it up and soak it up. Here is an illustration of the old sin nature's miserliness, not wanting to share, not wanting to give, and so forth. It just keeps taking and taking and taking and taking. This will kill a person to get its substance. This will use a person to get its substance. This says, once I get the substance for myself, I'm going to hoard it. That's the old sin nature. The world centers in me. It revolves around me. Everything I want. And so that's what's typical here. But it's typical of the nature in us. The spirit in us lusts to envy, says the book of James. We want and so forth. So when we get it, what do? Just like that dry ground, it hoards it. Now, come to Luke 12, verse 13. One of the company said to him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. He said, Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? But he said to them, Take heed and beware of covetousness. Remember, the chief characteristic of the old sin nature is lust. I had not known lust except the law said, Thou shalt not covet, says the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7. So all of these things are simply adding to what the horseleach does. Covet something for nothing. Covet its own security. Covet its own satisfaction. Covet the things of another for itself, and then to hoard them. Take heed, because a man's life consists not in the abundance of things which he possesses. Here is life-producing substance, water, but the arid ground will not give it up. It's going to keep it for itself. Pastor Moki used to say, you get all you can all you get, and then sit on it till the undertaker takes you away. All right? And the old standard, how much did they leave? They left it all. All right. He spoke a parable unto them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. He thought within himself, what shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. This will I do. I'll pull down my barns, build greater. There I'll bestow my fruits and goods. I'll say to my soul, soul, you have much goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, thou fool, this night your soul is going to be required of you. Then who shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. The old sin nature in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, the old sin nature said, I want the world, the perfection of the world, the health to my life that this perfect world and environment can give me. I want to eat of the fruit, partake of the beauty, see it all. I want to take it all in, but I want it for myself. And Adam and Eve stole from God. They were going to hoard it for themselves. But God said, too bad. Your soul is required when you do that. So these things, again, are pictures of the old sin nature. Okay, let's go back to Proverbs 26. You didn't know that a horseleach could teach you all these things, could you? Yeah, it's pretty good. God gives us perfect illustrations. You just have to dig it out sometimes. Okay, Proverbs chapter 26. Now, the last thing is the fire. And the fire is something that needs something to exist. Now, remember, under normal circumstances, there is nothing wrong with any of these things. The grave is a normal part of life, looking toward the resurrection. The womb, having physical relations and bearing children and deriving pleasure from a marital situation. Nothing wrong with that. Watering ground and using it to produce food. Nothing wrong with that. Lighting a fire. Nothing wrong with that. But what Solomon has done has shown that these things inordinately have an appetite that is never satisfied. You dig a hole and the grave says, hey, I want to put something in it. A woman who is destitute says, well, hey, look, instead of getting a good job, I will just sell my body and then extort it in the workplace. The miser said, I'm going to keep it all for myself. And then the fire. Note, where no wood is, verse 20, the fire goes out. What's the fire have to have in order to have a life of its own? The substance of another. As the ground sits on it in a miserly fashion, the fire must consume it. And here's where we get in things like just simply consuming it, says James, upon our lust. The United States of America, they say, is $85 billion in debt just with plastic cards alone, and that probably is a conservative estimate. What are we doing? We're buying, consuming. We need more and more and more and more to satisfy. Children on Christmas morning get all of these things, and they say, is this all? Or, well, my cousin got something better than me. They want it. What are they doing? They want the merchandise of another. They want what another has, the life of another, the substance of another, just simply to consume it on their lust, to make them feel good. But what happens? Once the substance has been used up, what does it have to do? Go out and get more. And that is the epitome of lust. An aggressive, assertive nature to acquire just simply to sustain its own passion, drive indicated in the fire. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. As coals are to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. Now let's go to James chapter 3. Since the book of Psalms there uses fire and the tongue. I think we should go to the book of James, chapter 3, and look at verse number 5. It says there, even so the tongue is a little member. You see, all you have to have is just that little spark of lust, just a little bit. All you have to have is the desire to go beyond its boundaries and want something more than we deserve, want something more than our due. Then we've got to take action to build the fire, to have it increase burning. The tongue is a little member and boasts great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindles. We talk about forest fires. All of us have seen Smokey the Bear. And only you can prevent forest fires. A whole forest with sometimes millions of acres can be destroyed. By what? A flamethrower? Nope. A little match. A little flick of the bic can destroy it all. And that's what it's talking here. But what did that fire do? To satisfy itself, it had to consume the substance of another. And here in this particular case, it's talking about perhaps a reputation of another. That person is popular, and in order for me to get the best of that person, I've got to ruin their reputation so that people will praise me instead of that one. So, the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members. It defiles the whole body. It's set on fire, the course of nature, and is set on fire of hell. And all of these things talk about the course of nature inordinately. Now, one more verse here, and then we'll go back to the horseleach. Chapter 4, a couple more verses. So, the fire indicates passionate desire for something that doesn't belong to us, or lust. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lust that war in your members? You lust and desire to have. The two sides of the two daughters of the horseleach cry, give, or else I'm threatening you. You've got to satisfy me. You've got to fill me up. And as their tank gets low, they cry out, give again, threatening. You kill, you lust and have not, you kill, desire to have and cannot obtain. You fight in war and you have not because you ask not. But then you have the audacity, the nerve to ask, but still you don't receive because you ask amiss, that you might consume it upon your lust. That's the fire. God, if you'll just give me this, I'll be happy. That's nonsense. If it'd give it to you, all you'd do is use it up, and then you'd want more just simply for the express purpose of satisfying the desires of the flesh. Now, all of these things then bring us right back to the horseleach. And we just have a minute. You'll note the diagram here of the horseleach, and then you will note our standard diagram of what we call the old sin nature. That is, the horseleach is God's visual aid in nature to show us something that's invisible to us, but will help us to learn something about what we have. You know, the Apostle Paul fought against this horseleach constantly. He says, the good that I would, I do not. But the bad that, well, how's it go? I'm not quoting it right here. Let's go to Romans chapter 7. Verse 15. Romans 7:15. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. What I hate, that do I. Now, is that double talk? No. He's talking about the fact that in his flesh there's a horseleach. There's a horseleach with two daughters crying constantly, give. They're illustrated by those four things. The grave, which desires the life of another to get its substance. The barren womb, which desires the life of another to get its substance. The dry ground, that when it gets substance, it hoards it for itself. And the fire that consumes simply to sustain its own life. For if you have nothing else to consume, the fire goes out. So it must acquire substance to burn. If then I do that which I would not, I consent unto the law that it's good. Now then it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. That's the horseleach. And as we close this out, I hope that the horseleach study will leave a permanent impression, simply because it is that type of animal that God has used, plus those four added things, to teach us that the spirit in us lusts to envy. It covets constantly, covets different things. The pride of self-righteousness, the pleasure of unrighteousness, the combination of the two in all sorts of ways, yet without dying to a nature that says, I want the best of life in any area, but I don't want the will of God. That's the philosophy of the horseleach.